Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. And welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Sharon, and welcome back to part 4 of our podcast, Enjoy. Unfortunately, the media narrative is saying out there that there's really only 2 types of teachers, ones that teach phonics explicitly and others that don't. It's such a incorrect. I mean, there's so many ways that we're teaching as teachers, and it's such a comprehensive thing to teach.
I know.
Yeah.
Do you know, the most frustrating thing to me at the moment is I don't even know how to get the message through in the media about what the correct information is. So that it seems to me that there's a bias in the media even, and I don't know whether it's just through ignorance or something that's definitely going on, or somebody's hoodwinked them into thinking only one thing. But it's very, very frustrating. You know, I don't care what's being said out there in the media as long as the truth. That's what we really want to make sure of, because it's not fair to teachers and schools and the children, and in the long run it even frightens principals into thinking they need to go and buy programs or their school's going to get criticised or
fear of missing out
in some way.
Or fear of missing out. You know, there's something new coming in that we need to all do now. Like, let's throw everything else out and let's do this new thing.
Look, again, it's not even the principal's fault if they've not been given the opportunity for professional learning. And it's a long time since we had that sort of statewide professional learning, really good stuff, right back to the days for our age group when all the teachers were learning through professional programs like ELIC, Early Literacy and Service Course. It was so good. It was something that everybody was learning about together, so you don't end up with someone coming in and hoodwinking some schools about what they should be doing.
And there's a very repetitive narrative in the media that gives about 4 dot points as to what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And it's, just unfortunate that it's simplified and it's not really covering what we need to cover. So
exactly. And even incorrect statements are being made. Like, I don't know that in Australia we've ever really used the term whole language, but the media do. So they'll say, the phonics teachers, they'll teach phonics really well, but whole language teachers don't. And, you know, it's just believed as though that's true. Or they'll say whole language teachers will tell children to guess words. It's not true.
No.
Or the word balanced literacy. Well, now you can't even use the word balance. That's why I talk about a comprehensive approach, because people have got the wrong idea about what balanced teaching is. Balance meaning you're covering everything, not emphasising one thing over another. There you go.
It's sort of weaponising words. Lingo.
It's why I prefer listening to podcasts and finding out about who is the person who's speaking. Do they really have a broad range of knowledge and teaching experience to be making these claims?
And Di, what about parents' role in helping children in this first year of school? Lots of reading to them at home?
Oh, yes, still reading to them at home. We know the children who start school being able to read are coming from homes where they were read to and read too often, and even read particular types of books often. So many parents will ask for advice about which books to read aloud to their children, and a list of those is very useful. So I have a document available for parents and teachers, and that can be added to the show notes as well.
Yes, that's right. That's really good. I'll provide a link to that one. And perhaps another role for teachers and parents is for teachers to share this podcast with parents so that they can get past those media messages.
Oh, I think that would be fantastic. It's so easy to listen to a podcast, you know.
Yeah.
I will listen to a podcast while I'm driving in the car or doing housework or, you know, gardening, whatever it is that I can just listen and not think, I've got to find extra time to do that.
Yeah.
And I know I've been thinking, Phil, you should start up a whole series for parents because because you're a parent doesn't mean you know what books to read to your children even.
Yes.
I know all of my godchildren, when they had kids, wanted that information. And, you know, so many parents over the years have. And schools, you know, a lot of schools don't have a librarian anymore. So to get information about what are the best books to buy is very important. So those lists are great. The other website where something like that's available too is the Foundation for Literacy website.
Yeah.
You know, great articles for people to read, but that list of books is there too.
Yeah. Schools in areas where there's a lot of disadvantages, they've got further problems, haven't they? I had a boy who was in year 7 in one of these schools who didn't have any books in his classroom, he didn't have any at home, and he was banned from reading books from the school library because he hadn't brought the books back. So in all 3 cases, he had no access to books. And I thought, well, you know, let's change that for kids in these sort of schools as well. So
that's tragic.
Yeah.
And, you know, on YouTube, there's a lot of really great books being read aloud by authors and actors and so forth.
Yeah.
But I realise too, you can't presume that every home can afford to have computers or iPads and have the internet. So it's very important for schools to make their school library even accessible for parents to borrow from because that might be the only place they can get books to read to their children.
And this boy, unfortunately, got to year 7 and he was still struggling with reading, and we brought in the language experience approach, which really helped him.
Yes, of course it would.
You know, he was really interested in trucks, so we got him to talk about trucks, and we wrote that down, and then he could have material that he could read that was about trucks, and that was a beginning start for him, which was fantastic. So
look, language experience work, since Rach Van Allen started working with that, in the 1970s or 80s, and it's always been really, really successful work to do with children, particularly if they're struggling with reading, and perhaps as an older boy like that one in year 7, to find material that he's capable of reading and therefore enjoying may not be published books for his age group, but starting with his interests and writing down his language, then of course semantics and syntax is going to be such a wonderful cue for him for learning words. So they're great.
Yeah. Di, we haven't yet talked about learning to automatically recognise and write all of the high-frequency words.
Oh, yes, it's such an essential aspect, isn't it? And I find that if children are involved in a lot of shared reading and the teacher is pointing with a thin pointer to the words properly during the reading.
So the kids can all see the words if there's a thin pointer.
Yep. Some of the pointers are covered with great blobby things on the end of them and you can't tell what's being pointed to. So, you know, the first big books came with a long, thin pointer. That was very clever. But anyway, those high-frequency words are going to be in all texts. That's why they're called high-frequency. And so they're going to be read often and even noticed by the children if we're pointing properly. And especially if we're doing the sorts of things I talked about before of cutting sentences up into words. And I can say to the children, what do you notice about the words we're coming across frequently when we're reading, or that you want to write quite often when you're writing? Let's start to make a list of those. And because you notice they're in so much writing and you want to use them, they'd be good ones for us to learn, to automatically recognise, to read them, and even be able to spell them. So we do both of those, the reading and the writing. Because the high-frequency words are about 50% of everything we read and write. They're very important.
It is so critical, isn't it? It's just going to give them a leg up if they know as many of those words as possible. Yep,
definitely.
Yep.
And in your show notes, I know you'll refer to the article that I've written about learning high-frequency words.
Yes. Yep.
And I actually realised that teachers and parents need help thinking about each of those words, because how I might go about learning one word might be different to how I might go about learning another.
Yep.
So, for example, if children want to learn the word said,
Yep.
they can hear each of the sounds in the word said, but I've actually even had children say, isn't it interesting that in the middle is an AI? So they're hearing a sound, but it's represented by AI. So that's the part of the word in that word that needs to be noticed and discussed.
Yeah, why it's that way.
And, Yep. So if children want to learn the word ran in comparison, it makes sense to just use knowledge of letter-sound relationships. The is the R, the A is an A, and the N is the N. So that's a different way of learning the word than I would use for the word said, where we're actually looking at an unusual spelling pattern.
Yeah.
And then, as I mentioned before, if you wanted to learn the word two, T-W-O, then by explaining the relationship with the meaning of the word, twin and twice, that morphemic aspect of our language, that's why it's spelt T-W. And there are many words like that where understanding the meaning can help you to know about the spelling.
Yeah. So it's just not recognising them by sight. It's also...
No, it's not just some sort of rote learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people might think that process, look, say, spell, cover, write, check, is just some sort of automatic, memory thing. But I find that I now am more inclined to say, look at the word. Now, what does look at the word really mean? It really means you're sort of taking a photograph of that word so that if you close your eyes, you can still see it. And look, say the word, because then you're hearing all of the sounds in a word when you say the word. And spell, now we're using the letters by name, which is quite different than just hearing the sounds. We're now saying the letters. Look, say, spell, cover. And we're just covering it up so that if you've got that picture of that word in your head, can you still see it? So even for look, I'm inclined to say to the children, notice.
Yes.
What do you notice about that word? So instead it might be that we notice it's unusual there's an AI in the middle. Or we might notice that there's a letter even though we don't pronounce it.
Or we'll notice that it's linked to other words or,
Yes, and that analogy of when I know this word, are there other words I would also know? Or even when learning it, well, I already know day, so learning lay, play, say is going to be easy because I already know that one word. So it might be words with the same spelling pattern. Also, then, of course, we can think about adding prefixes and suffixes to the base word so that we're not just starting out and learning, perhaps 120 words, but by the time you add prefixes and suffixes to them, even just adding S to cats and hats and mats, you already know a lot more words than just the 120.
Yeah, hundreds or thousands. So that's really expanding their whole repertoire of words they know how to read.
And spell.
And spell. Yeah, it's really important work. It's almost like notice and problem solve as well. It's
look, I find that discussion about why the word might be spelt the way it is, and I will even, with this first year at school, I can refer to a dictionary of etymology online and give them the information if I don't know it myself. So that there's an understanding about why words seem to be in unusual spelling. It's because of what other language those words have come from. And again, I'm not going to wait till grade 4 to start that sort of thing because, the kids are curious and they want to know why. Why is the most common question they probably ask. But we call them high-frequency words because they're the words we use most often in our reading and writing for the rest of our lives. Phil, when the children are going to be ready to learn those words is something I have to watch out for as a teacher, because if I start telling them how to spell words when they're still just using strings of letters, they may lose confidence in themselves as a writer and won't even write anything anymore. They think they have to know how to spell a word before they can write it. I've even noticed kids, if in their reading development they actually get to recognise what words look like rather than memorising something, and they're making that one-to-one match, they'll realise that as a writer, they're not writing some of the words correctly. It's like they take this little backward step in writing because they're too frightened to have a go at new words. So we have to really be careful to keep their confidence going. And I'll notice that children are starting to use some of these high-frequency words in their own writing, and they'll even be spelling them correctly. And that is a really big sign for me that they're ready to start learning words. And again, if I help them to be involved in it, they understand why. What are the words you notice we're reading a lot or that you want to use in your writing?
Yes, because the relationship with writing, we could go into that as a whole other area, because really to learn even phonics, when they write, they're actually using that in their writing, aren't they?
They are. Yep. And it's a very interesting topic to bring up, Phil, because why I've written two documents, one about learning sound symbol relationships for reading and one about for writing, is because when you're reading, you're actually looking at words, looking at letters and figuring out how to say them.
Yep. And
so it's a matter of when I look at the letter P, how am I going to pronounce it? And I'll probably need to use context or notice what letters are around it and so forth. Like if it's combined with an H, what will I do? But, I could also, with the children, discover that most of the time when I see the letter P, it is going to be pronounced as a P. So helping them to come to those sorts of conclusions about the truth of the language and how it works is really important. So the letters I might begin to learn with the kids will first of all be the ones where the letter only represents one sound or minimal number of sounds versus letters that could represent lots of sounds. So that's why consonants, of course, they are usually one letter, one sound, whereas the vowels represent many sounds. So learning about the consonants is easier than learning about the vowels. So just common sense tells me I'm going to start with those. But because I do onset rhyme work as well, and every RIME begins with a vowel, at, ap, op, it, etc., then we're going to be helping the children to read and write words with vowels in them. Because, when they first start to write, they'll write dog, DG.
Yes.
Hearing that vowel is not as easy. So I do want them to realise that words have vowels, so the onset rhyme work helps me with that. But when we're learning about sound symbol relationships for spelling, then we're thinking about, I want to write a word, what sounds do I hear? So which sounds will I choose to learn first? Which are going to be the easiest in terms of I hear a sound, how's it going to be represented? And, there are 44 sounds, so I need to deal with all of those sounds, 44 sounds in the English language. But when it comes to looking at words, there's a lot to be learned apart from the vowels and the consonants. All of those words that have EA, AI, OU, etc. in them. There's many of those digraphs, and we don't need to learn blends unless the children are having trouble with pronouncing words like bread, and they'll say bed. Then I know that child's not hearing or noticing the R in that word is there that has to be taken notice of. But I'm certainly thinking about phonics for reading and phonics for spelling as being two different ways of looking at words and that sound symbol relationship learning that needs to be done. So that's why there are two documents about that. I'm a bit concerned about it's always just thinking about phonics as one thing, and it's different to use it as a reader than as a writer.
And I suppose it's where these programs that are just emphasising reading and phonics are only doing one aspect of it, the phonics.
That's right. And, again, learning to read, learning to spell have so many things where one helps the other. But we also need to make sure we don't confuse what you're doing as a listener and hearing sounds and representing them being spelling versus looking at words and working out how to say them, you're reading.
Two different things,
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can use phonics in both
Absolutely,
areas.
but you go about it, approaching it from a different way. And, I know a really good friend and great educator, Faye Bolton, when she was working with kids, if she wanted them to be listening for sounds, she'd have these great big ears, false ears that kids could put on. And if they were looking, then they would have these big imitation glasses that they could put on. Because she noticed that some teachers will tell children things like, I want you to look for this sound. Well, you can't look for a sound. You can only listen for a sound. So we have to be careful how we even use our own language as a teacher to make sure children know the difference between looking and listening. Again, that's where, the examples shown in that literacy toolkit that's available online, very good examples. There's even some little video clips. But there is one where a teacher actually asks children either to listen for a letter or look for a sound, and I think, I'd love to be able to fix that up, because that's the sort of confusion that teachers inadvertently make. They don't mean to say that.
Can you just correct us? What should it say?
Well, if I was wanting to focus on the sound in a word, then I'd have to say, let's read this word and listen for the k sound.
Yes.
And then we'll notice, well, in this word it was a C, and here it was a CK, and here it was a QU or whatever. They're going to use that knowledge then to know how to spell a word, perhaps like crack. At the beginning it's the C, but at the end it's the CK.
So in their writing.
But if I'm reading, then we have to look at the letters. So I'm looking at, a number of sentences, and I'm looking for everywhere I find the letter C. So I'm looking for a letter, but I listen for a sound.
Okay. All right. And one's more to do with your spelling in your writing, and the other one's more for reading.
That's right. Looking is for reading, listening is for spelling.
Okay, wow. So, Di, this is all about professional development for teachers, and it's what's going to make our education system better, lots and lots of professional development. So teachers become better experts in the teaching of reading, being able to assess each child's strategies and processes, and then providing the most relevant teaching rather than spending money on packaged programs, which we have mentioned a few times.
We have. We're obviously not selling a program, Phil.
No, we're not.
Because I do wonder about when people push that. I think, okay, what's going on in your life?
Yeah, we're not making any money out of this, but
that's for sure.
It's for the good of.
My husband keeps bringing that up when I spend days on it.
It does, but we hear about the profession of teaching and teachers enjoying their work with their children and really becoming enriched by their teaching, so that it's a rewarding career rather than something where they just rehash things all the time.
For sure. I think it applies to so many teachers I've worked with over the years. Like we were saying before, once they learn how to do good work and that it works and it makes sense, it's worth doing, it's doable, then they don't really want to change unless we learn something that's better, that's something we didn't know about before. And definitely when it comes to aspects of comprehension and vocabulary, the main research about that's probably been in the last 25 years or so. So, and I mean, even now, people like Kelly Cartwright are coming up with other aspects about reading, and Nell Duke with her, that they're saying, well, often there are children who can do all of these other things, but they're still struggling with reading. So what else is going on? And so they're describing a number of other things. I know in the article that goes with this podcast, I've written about motivation, cohesive ties in comprehension and so forth. A lot of things that would not have been written about, 20 years ago were certainly. Motivation has been known for a long time about being very important, and children self-selecting their own reading.
Yes.
Very important part of that.
Yeah. And so you were going to say something about Elstonwick Primary where they have their own individual book boxes?
Well, they do. Even in the foundation year, very early on in the year, they establish the routine of having some reading time every day so that the children develop that habit.
Yep.
I am a reader. I read every day.
Yep.
So they need to instantly have access to what they can personally read. And at the beginning, it might be the poems and songs and chants, nursery rhymes, etc., that they can read. And we might even think read might just be memorised at first, but I know that the more I use those to show them on a big chart as well, pointing to the words, that the more they start to make that one-to-one match even with that material, the more they're actually going to be reading rather than memorising. But first of all, it's having something in their book box that when I say it's reading time, they can instantly take out and start reading. It might be a copy of the language experience books we're making, and they can read those. And, you know, if we had time, there might be personal language experience books, but, you know, that's pretty much out of the question when you've got 25 children in your class and you can't write the book for every one of them. So they're learning that, and accompanying that, of course, is the classroom library, which is very well organised, and including the children helping with that, so they get to talk about why will we put all of these books in this box and why will we put these ones in this box and what will we label them. And they love doing pictures to go with the labels. So if it was a book about sharks, then one of the children will do a picture of a shark on that label, and the children know that in that box in the classroom library they're going to find some books about sharks. That they may not be able to read all of the words, but they love non-fiction books. They love looking through them, and they're looking at the pictures and learning a lot about the world even by doing that. So that access to a well-organised classroom library, and the teachers are borrowing from the school library to help them to keep changing and updating, and as children are becoming able to read more complex texts, changing them. They have favourite authors, so they might have a whole tub of books by John Birmingham, and they know that if they can read this book by John Birmingham, then they're probably able to read others because he writes for that age group. And think about the authors suitable for those beginning readers that could be in your classroom library.
And then the kids start talking together about those authors because they all have shared experiences with those books in the classroom library, don't they? So that's another whole aspect. It
does, and it brings in the whole talking about books, the response to books, their feelings, what they think about them, what happened to so-and-so, and, you know, being able to put themselves into the characters of those books is a really, really important part of comprehending what you're reading. So time to talk about the books after they're reading, talking about the content, but also talking about things that they've noticed about books, that this one had a repeated part to it, or this non-fiction book, the picture showing how a shark attacks someone or whatever, and talking about that experience, perhaps relating to their own experience, and also recommending books to each other. You know, we're thinking about a community of readers in our classroom, not kids who are sitting there working their way through exercises, but who are actually reading books and talking about them and making recommendations about them. From that personal book collection, being able to take something from that book box home, not going looking for something at the end of the day to take home to read, and the teacher can't possibly monitor all of that. But if they've been helping them to select the right books for their book boxes, that's the ideal place to take something home from. And it might even be, this is a book I want my parents to read to me. And you can have a little bookmark that goes in those books so that when the book goes home, the parent knows this is a book that not what my child will read, but what I will read to my child.
We did a podcast with Sharon about book selection strategies where the teacher or an expert adult helps the child who's having difficulty choosing books. And this was for older children, but I'm sure it applies to younger ones as well. So,
absolutely, definitely. You know, you feel like you can read it, or if you can't, you at least know that you can't, but you're interested in it and you think of it as a book you might browse through, or someone's going to read that to you. Looking for what you're really interested in, authors, topics, etc.
Yep.
And, getting into that whole habit of what do you do to find a book that you really like. If there's books that have a back cover blurb, reading that,
Yep.
starting the beginning of the book and finding out, does this sound like something I'd be interested in or that I'll be able to have a go at most of the words?
Yep.
And it's something we give so many demonstrations about all through the year, every year.
All the time.
And it begins with the first couple of years at school. In fact, on that, we've talked about that right at the beginning. On the very first day, we want kids to take home something they can read, might be in inverted commas, the word read, but I am a reader.
Yeah.
And essential.
And for foundation, we mentioned before those really wonderful books that some children experience before coming to school by Mem Fox and Pamela Allen, etc., would be another really vital collection to have in your book boxes or in your classroom library. That's
right, and that's why I mentioned before about buying multiple copies of those so that when they've been read to the kids, then a number of them can borrow one of them to put into their book box and read during independent reading time. This whole thing is the start of building children's reading stamina.
Yes.
So not just the habit of reading, but being able to do it for a longer and longer period of time. Another reason why we want to make sure we're leaving time for this in our day, because it's what it's all about. All this other stuff is to help the children to learn to read. It's not being done as an end in its own right.
A program tends to take over the space of the literacy lesson and not leave the time for actual reading or writing. And so, that's one of the most valuable activities you can have going in your classroom where the children actually read and write, which is
what it's all about.
Bit of a no-brainer to me, but...
Yep. And, we've covered a huge amount, Phil. But learning to read is complex. And a comprehensive reading curriculum must include all of the elements that help all children to become successful readers. We've covered many of those elements today, but I'd like to really make sure that we finish in some ways with the reminder that reading should be really enjoyable for the children. So we want to ensure that they not only can read, but they want to read and will enjoy reading for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely critical, isn't it?
It really is. It's sad to come across schools where kids have hated the exercises so much and that's what they think reading is. So it's not something they want to do. They don't read at home. They wouldn't dream of going to the library at lunchtime or something and reading. So they're the kids who become our struggling readers more than any others. Yeah,
they've learned how to decode, but they're not really comprehending and enjoying it. And by the time they get to high school, that comprehension aspect is so important for them to want to continue to read.
Definitely is, because that's how you got to enjoy the reading, by understanding what it's about. So, again, it's a matter of teachers learning about how to teach every component to children and all aspects of reading being emphasised in the way that the schools are operating. There's so much available online, like the courses and the podcasts that you and Sharon provide are such excellent professional learning for schools. And this is the work that really makes a difference to children's reading success and ensures that the children are going to love reading for the rest of their lives.
And we must mention the International Literacy Association as a terrific resource as well.
Oh, definitely. And in the last couple of years, the webcasts they've had have been absolutely fabulous. I've enrolled for every one of them. Hearing from some of the best researchers, it's just incredible. We're very fortunate. Schools can join that association. And within Australia, we've got the Australian Literacy Educators Association and we've got the Primary English Teachers Association. So the opportunities are there, even if it's not being provided by your state system. And schools should be looking to those. If I'm a principal, my main responsibility is to make sure my teachers are getting good professional development from really knowledgeable people and who are going to provide a very comprehensive look at reading and writing, not a narrow one.
Yes, because I think that's the big problem these days is there's so much information out there on the internet or wherever, and if a principal's not sure where to direct teachers, then it's easy for them to go off onto Pinterest or going off to other parts of the internet, or then buying a program and thinking that's going to cover. And the other thing about programs is they don't really cover all the aspects of the Australian curriculum.
Well, that's true. That's true. They're not developed for that purpose.
No.
I know anything I'm writing, I'm looking all the time. Well, is this fitting in with what the teachers are supposed to do? Because they can't serve two masters or do it well.
Teaching children in their first year of school is about teaching them comprehensively with reading. And to do that, we need to just professionally develop ourselves to become more expert at that, rather than relying on one sole program or one piece of evidence or whatever. It's about being up with the latest research, and if you're following the right research, you're going to be following the right practices.
It's true. And in many ways, I think these days it's politicians in the media who I wish would be doing the professional learning, because they're the ones who seem to have the power over what's happening in schools. And it's why, as busy as a principal's life is, and it sure is, on the way home from school, turn on a podcast and find out, some really good stuff that you want to be introducing to your teachers. Keep yourself up to date, and not just from one person's perspective. I will purposely listen to what everybody has to say so that I know what's going on out there, and I can use my own critical judgment about, well, it just doesn't even make sense to focus more on one aspect of reading than another, or to only focus on one aspect. So I'm going to be listening with that critical ear, and learning from what might be useful, but making sure that I don't get down to being very narrow in what I understand reading to be. What works and what doesn't work. Sometimes, even when a child gets a lot of help with reading, and it might be just with some phonics material, if their reading improves, then someone's going to say, oh, see, every child needs that.
Yeah.
So, the what works is a big question, isn't it? It might have worked for this child, but does it work for everybody? There
is a danger in that. There are people that say, well, I think this should be used for all children because it's worked with its one child. That's, yeah. But what our podcast has done today too is give people a big range of strategies and ideas and techniques and tools that will be things that they can try out. I mean, we've covered a lot, but I think, even if people just try one or two aspects out just to start with, if they haven't tried them before.
Yeah, and look, if you're not reading aloud enough to your children, that's a really easy one to start with, and something we know is going to make a big difference. Yeah. And if you're not sure about what to read aloud, then go to the lists that are provided, because you'll be even doing a better job.
Yeah.
So I think, start with what you feel, especially if there are mandates in your school system.
Yeah.
And it might not include you have to read to your children every day, but that that's something you should do.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's going against the mandate, but you're adding to your classroom to be a richer one.
Just starting a classroom library, starting book boxes, starting read aloud, a bit of shared reading and some independent reading. I mean, they're sort of the basic diet of getting things going in your classroom, probably, aren't they?
That's right.
Yep.
And let's face it, unless your children are to having some time for independent reading, you're not going to have the chance to listen to them read and find out what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I know that in all of the schools that I've worked in over the years, if they don't have classroom libraries and independent book boxes, that's the first thing we do.
Yep.
Because unless we can listen to the children read, we really have no idea what they're doing as readers.
Yeah. It's the fundamental thing to start with, that's right.
Yeah, apart from the fact that it gives them a chance to practice reading.
Yeah, that's right. And dare I say, we should have time for writing as well.
Oh, absolutely. They go together.
Yeah.
We're just sort of thinking about if you're not sure where to start, what would you add?
That's
then?
right. Yeah.
It's so easy to add read aloud.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Di. This podcast has been turned into a number of podcasts, so I hope you've enjoyed all of them. And thank you, Di, especially for all the research and all the work you've done in preparing this. It's been massive, I know.
Yeah, You know, it's so important.
Yeah.
You know, I have sleepless nights worrying about when, you know, demands come down from above that are not really going to help everybody. And I just think, you know, before I die, I hope I can change that.
That's right. And we hope everyone gets to try some of these things out and change things in their classrooms and get joy out of it and take the learning deeper. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Di, and bye for now.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.